Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Y&R Trends. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The room felt smaller with every breath Jack Abbott took, the walls of the old Abbott cabin seeming to close in as the weight of unspoken truths finally crushed what little patience he had left, his eyes blazing with a mixture of terror, grief, and rage as he stared at Noah Newman, whose silence had become louder than any confession, and when Jack finally spoke, his voice was low and trembling, barely restrained. "Tell me the truth, is Allie dead?" The words hung in the air like a loaded gun. And Noah swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the door as if he could still escape this reckoning. But Jack stepped forward, grabbed him by the collar, and slammed him back against the wall, his hands tightening around Noah's throat in a moment that shocked even himself, years of restraint snapping under the unbearable fear that Allie Abbott, his niece, his second chance at family, the living proof that his father's legacy wasn't just pain and secrets, might already be gone. And Noah gasped, clawing at Jack's wrists, choking out fragmented denials that only fueled Jack's desperation, because Jack had seen this look before, the look of someone who knew the truth but was too afraid to speak it, the same look Phyllis once had when she hid paternity secrets, the same look Ashley wore when family betrayals nearly tore them apart. And Jack roared, his voice cracking, "You don't lie like this unless you're hiding something horrific. So tell me now before I lose what's left of my sanity." And Noah's resistance weakened, tears streaming down his face as the weight of guilt finally became unbearable, and in that moment, the past weeks flashed through his mind. The frantic phone calls from Los Angeles that went unanswered, the mysterious text messages sent from Allie's phone that never sounded like her, the shadowy figures following her after she began digging into forbidden Abbott family records, the night she vanished after saying she was close to uncovering something that could destroy powerful people. And Jack loosened his grip just enough for Noah to breathe, but not enough to escape, and Noah whispered, broken, "I didn't want you to find out like this." And Jack's heart slammed against his ribs as he shook Noah, demanding, "Find out what?" And Noah's voice trembled as he confessed that Allie had been investigating a secret financial pipeline tied to both Newman Enterprises and a long-buried Abbott trust fund. A pipeline that funneled money through shell companies, connected to a man long thought dead, someone whose name Jack hadn't heard in decades. And as Noah spoke, Jack's anger slowly gave way to horror, because he realized Allie hadn't just stumbled onto corporate corruption, she had uncovered something deeply personal, something tied to his father, John Abbott, and a sealed document that proved Allie was not just related to them by blood, but was the legal heir to an inheritance that powerful people would kill to protect. And Noah admitted he'd tried to pull Allie out, begged her to stop, but she refused, convinced that exposing the truth would finally cleanse the Abbott name. And Jack's voice dropped to a whisper as he asked again, more afraid than ever, "Noah, is she dead?" And Noah's silence shattered him, because silence was the answer Jack feared most. And when Noah finally spoke, his words were barely audible. "They want everyone to think she is." And Jack staggered back as if struck, his knees weakening as the realization hit that Allie's disappearance wasn't an accident, wasn't a runaway, but a meticulously staged erasure. And Noah confessed that the night Allie vanished, he'd received a video message from her, her face bruised, her voice shaking, warning him that if anything happened to her, it would be made to look like she never existed, that even Jack would be told she was dead. And Jack felt something inside him fracture, guilt flooding his veins because he had pushed Allie to learn about her roots without realizing he was sending her into danger. And as Noah sobbed, revealing that he'd been blackmailed into silence, threatened with the destruction of his family if he spoke, Jack's mind raced, piecing together Victor Newman's sudden interest in Abbott finances, Diane Jenkins' evasive behavior, the way security footage around the time of Allie's disappearance mysteriously vanished. And Jack realized this wasn't just about one missing girl, this was about power, legacy, and the lengths people would go to bury the truth. And as Jack released Noah completely, the anger returned, not at Noah, but at the invisible enemy pulling the strings. And Jack swore, his voice cold and resolute, that if anyone had hurt Allie, if anyone had dared to erase her life to protect their secrets, he would tear down every empire involved, Newman, Abbott, or otherwise. And Noah warned him that the people behind this were watching, that Allie might still be alive, but only if Jack played along, only if he pretended to believe she was dead. And Jack's chest tightened as he realized the cruel irony, that to save Allie, he would have to mourn her publicly. And as the scene ended with Jack staring out into the darkness, his reflection fractured in the window, one truth became terrifyingly clear. Allie Abbott was either being held somewhere, waiting to be rescued, or she was already lost, and either way, Jack Abbott had just crossed a line he could never uncross, setting into motion a war that would expose secrets, shatter families, and prove once again that in Genoa City, the truth never stays buried forever. As the silence stretched after Noah's devastating confession, Jack Abbott stood frozen, every instinct screaming at him to move, to act, to destroy whatever force had dared to touch Allie's life. Yet his body refused to cooperate as the truth settled like a slow poison in his veins, because knowing that Allie might be alive but deliberately erased was somehow more horrifying than death itself, and Jack's mind replayed every conversation he'd ever had with her, every smile, every hopeful declaration that she finally felt like she belonged, and the idea that someone had weaponized that hope against her ignited a fury so profound it bordered on madness, and Noah, still trembling, tried to explain that the men who took Allie weren't random criminals but professionals who spoke in coded threats and seemed less interested in money than in control, men who knew exactly who Allie was and why her existence endangered decades of carefully curated lies. And as Noah spoke, Jack began pacing, his voice cutting through the cabin like broken glass as he demanded names, locations, anything that could lead him to her. But Noah could only offer fragments: a warehouse near the docks, a burner phone that rang once and never again, a symbol carved into a table during one of the meetings, something that looked like an old Abbott Enterprises logo that had been retired years ago. And Jack stopped cold at that detail, because it meant the enemy wasn't just external, it was rooted in his own family's past, in deals John Abbott may have made in desperation to protect the company, deals that had grown into monsters that now demanded blood. And Jack realized with sick clarity that Allie hadn't just uncovered a secret, she had become the leverage that ensured it stayed buried. And Noah admitted that the staged death narrative was already in motion, fake hospital records prepared, whispers circulating that Allie had succumbed to an undisclosed illness overseas, and Jack's hands curled into fists as he imagined the cruelty of forcing him to grieve a lie, to stand at a memorial knowing his niece might be screaming for help somewhere in the dark, and Jack vowed that if pretending to believe the lie was the price of saving her, he would pay it, but only temporarily, because beneath the facade of mourning, he would hunt. And as Noah warned him that any overt move could get Allie killed, Jack's mind shifted into a colder, more strategic gear, the businessman emerging alongside the grieving uncle, and he began mapping out a plan that involved misdirection, alliances, and calculated silence, because if his enemies believed he was broken, distracted by grief, they would underestimate him, and Jack decided then and there that he would let Genoa City believe Allie was gone, even as he quietly dismantled the network that stole her. And Noah confessed that Victor Newman might already suspect the truth, that Victor's sudden interest in Abbott Legacy Holdings coincided too perfectly with Allie's disappearance, and Jack felt a chill run through him because if Victor was involved, or even aware, it meant this conspiracy operated at the highest level of power in Genoa City, where lives were collateral damage and secrets were currency, and Jack resolved to confront Victor not with accusations but with bait, offering up false concessions, dangling the illusion of surrender to see who moved first. And as dawn crept through the cabin windows, Jack instructed Noah to disappear, to leave town under the guise of grief and guilt, because Noah's presence alone could tip off the wrong people. And Noah hesitated, guilt-ridden, but Jack insisted, telling him that protecting Allie now meant isolation and sacrifice. And as Noah left, Jack finally allowed himself a moment of raw emotion, collapsing into a chair as tears streamed down his face, his voice breaking as he whispered Allie's name into the empty room like a prayer. And in that quiet agony he promised her that he would find her, no matter how deep the lies went, no matter whose blood stained the truth. And in the days that followed, Jack played his role perfectly, announcing Allie's supposed death with hollow eyes and controlled sorrow, accepting condolences while secretly monitoring every reaction, every flicker of relief or panic that crossed the faces of Genoa City's elite. And he noticed how Diane Jenkins avoided his gaze, how Victor Newman offered sympathy just a beat too rehearsed, how certain board members suddenly relaxed, and each observation became another thread in the web Jack was weaving. And behind closed doors, Jack began revisiting old Abbott files, uncovering a clandestine project dating back decades that involved offshore trusts, identity laundering, and the quiet removal of inconvenient heirs, a project John Abbott had allegedly shut down but never fully dismantled. And Jack realized with horror that Allie's existence threatened to reopen a vault of sins that powerful people had spent lifetimes sealing. And as Jack followed the money trail, He discovered a shadow organization that specialized in erasing people, not killing them outright, but making them legally non-existent, prisoners without names, and the implication hit him like a punch to the chest, because if Allie was alive, she was likely being held somewhere where the outside world believed she no longer existed, and Jack intensified his efforts, leveraging favors, calling in old debts, even aligning temporarily with enemies, because saving Allie mattered more than pride, and meanwhile Noah, hidden away, continued feeding Jack information through encrypted channels, revealing that Allie had once mentioned a contingency plan, a phrase she'd repeat whenever she sensed danger. Legacy breathes through truth, and Jack fixated on those words, convinced they were a clue, and after weeks of relentless searching, he uncovered a sealed Abbott Enterprises annex built decades ago, beneath a decommissioned facility, a place designed to operate off the books, and as Jack stood before its rusted doors, heart pounding, he knew he was stepping into the darkest chapter of his family's history, but he didn't hesitate because somewhere within the lies, the silence, and the shadows, Allie was waiting, and whether she was alive, broken, or barely holding on, Jack Abbott was done asking for the truth. He was going to rip it out of the hands that tried to bury it, and in that moment, one certainty burned brighter than fear itself. The truth about Allie Abbott would come out, and when it did, Genoa City would never be the same again. As Jack descended into the forgotten annex beneath the decommissioned facility, the air thick with dust and the echo of his own footsteps sounding like accusations from the past, his mind raced through every possibility of what he might find, because hope was a dangerous thing in a place designed to erase it, and yet he clung to it with a desperation that bordered on obsession, each rusted corridor and flickering emergency light reminding him that this was not just a physical descent but a plunge into the darkest, most carefully hidden sins of Abbott history, and with every step Jack felt the presence of his father, not as the moral compass John Abbott had tried to be in his later years, but as a flawed man who may have once believed that burying certain truths was the only way to protect his family, and Jack whispered aloud that protection built on lies always demanded a sacrifice, fearing Allie had become that sacrifice, and when he reached the inner chamber, a stark, windowless room lined with obsolete servers, medical equipment, and rows of metal lockers bearing nothing but numbers, Jack's chest tightened as he realized this place was never meant to save anyone, only to store them, and memories of Allie's laughter clashed violently with the sterile cruelty of the space, pushing Jack forward until he found evidence of recent activity, fresh footprints, a discarded syringe, a tablet still warm to the touch, and he knew with chilling certainty that he was closer than he had ever been, and yet the silence screamed louder than any alarm, because whoever operated here was meticulous, trained, and prepared to disappear at the first sign of exposure, and Jack's phone buzzed with a coded message from Noah warning him that Victor Newman had activated a private security firm known for containment solutions, and Jack realized time was no longer his ally, and as he pressed deeper, a memory resurfaced of Allie once telling him that the scariest thing about powerful people wasn't their money or influence but their patience, their willingness to wait years, even decades, for the perfect moment to act, and Jack felt sick knowing this plot may have been waiting for Allie's birth, her discovery, her curiosity, and when he finally found the holding area, a reinforced room with a single chair, restraints bolted to the floor, and a video monitor looping footage of a tranquil landscape meant to disorient the mind, Jack's knees nearly buckled because the room smelled faintly of antiseptic and fear, and he imagined Allie here, isolated, gaslit, told the world had forgotten her, and rage surged through him so violently he slammed his fist into the wall, vowing that whoever engineered this would pay not just financially but personally, and as he turned, he noticed something etched into the wall behind the monitor, faint but deliberate. Legacy breathes through truth, and Jack's breath caught, tears stinging his eyes because this was Allie's mark. Her proof of life, her way of telling him she had been here and had not surrendered, and that knowledge reignited his strength just as alarms suddenly blared, red lights flooding the corridor as security systems activated, forcing Jack to flee before he was trapped, and he escaped with only fragments, data copied hastily onto a drive, photographs burned into his memory, and a renewed certainty that Allie was alive, somewhere beyond his reach but not beyond rescue. And back in Genoa City, Jack intensified the charade of mourning while secretly orchestrating a counteroffensive, feeding false information to flesh out the conspiracy's leaders, watching as Diane grew increasingly erratic, as Victor subtly maneuvered to consolidate Abbott assets, and as whispers spread that Jack was unraveling under grief, which was exactly what he wanted them to believe, because grief made him invisible, underestimated, and dangerous, and Noah, still in hiding, revealed that Allie had been moved again. After Jack's intrusion, her captors panicking, tightening their grip, and Jack knew his window was closing, forcing him to confront the ultimate truth he had been avoiding, that saving Allie might require destroying everything his family had built, exposing scandals that would devastate the Abbotts, the Newmans, and Genoa City itself, and Jack accepted that cost without hesitation, because no legacy was worth a stolen life, and as alliances shifted and enemies revealed themselves, Jack prepared for the final move, one that would force the truth into the light no matter how violently the shadows resisted, because whether Allie emerged alive or broken, whether Genoa City crowned him a hero or condemned him as a traitor, Jack Abbott would not stop until the lie of her death was undone, and in that unyielding resolve, one truth burned brighter than fear, power, or legacy itself. The truth always survives, and when it does, it demands everything. When Jack finally returned to Genoa City after his near discovery beneath the abandoned annex, he carried the weight of that etched message like a heartbeat in his chest, because legacy breathes through truth was no longer just Allie's contingency phrase but a promise that she had survived terror, isolation, and psychological warfare without surrendering who she was, and that knowledge hardened Jack into something colder and more dangerous than grief alone ever could. A man who understood that to rescue Allie he would have to dismantle an entire ecosystem of power that thrived on silence. And as days turned into weeks, Jack played his role flawlessly, attending memorial planning meetings with hollow-eyed solemnity, allowing whispers to spread that he was unraveling, letting the board question his leadership while he quietly manipulated stock fluctuations and shell companies to bait his enemies into revealing themselves, because powerful people always made mistakes when they thought they had already won, and Jack watched closely as certain accounts tied to the old Abbott trusts suddenly reactivated, money moving in patterns that mirrored the data he'd pulled from the annex servers, and he knew the conspirators were repositioning, preparing for the moment when Allie's erasure would be finalized permanently, and Noah, still living in the shadows, sent Jack fragments of intercepted communications that confirmed the worst fear Jack had carried since that first confrontation in the cabin, that Allie was being conditioned, psychologically broken down, told that Jack had accepted her death, that no one was coming, that the world had already moved on, and the cruelty of that tactic ignited a fury in Jack so intense he had to lock himself in his office to keep from exploding, because the thought of Allie believing she was abandoned cut deeper than any physical harm could have, and Jack vowed then that the moment he reached her, the first word she would hear would be the truth, not whispered but undeniable. And meanwhile the pressure in Genoa City escalated as Victor Newman began subtly cornering Jack in public, offering thinly veiled condolences that felt more like interrogations, probing to see if Jack truly believed Allie was dead or if suspicion still flickered behind his eyes, and Jack responded with carefully curated despair, admitting that grief had dulled his instincts, that maybe it was time to let go of the past, words he knew Victor would interpret as surrender, and Victor took the bait, accelerating his push to absorb key Abbott holdings under the guise of stabilizing the company during Jack's fragile state. A move that confirmed Victor's proximity to the conspiracy even if Jack still lacked definitive proof, and Diane Jenkins, unraveling under the weight of secrets she'd helped bury years ago, began making desperate moves of her own, trying to erase paper trails, pressuring former associates into silence, and Jack saw in her panic the reflection of his own fear. But he refused to let empathy cloud his judgment, because whatever Diane's motives once were, she had allowed Allie to become collateral damage, and that was unforgivable, and as Jack tightened the noose, he orchestrated a controlled leak of information suggesting he had discovered evidence Allie was alive, watching carefully as certain players reacted with alarm while others feigned indifference. And within hours Noah confirmed that Allie had been moved again, proving Jack's leak had hit its mark. And though the knowledge that Allie was still being uprooted tore at him, it also proved she was alive and valuable enough to protect. And Jack realized then that Allie was the keystone holding this entire lie together, and if he could destabilize the system enough, her captors would be forced to surface, and Jack initiated the final phase of his plan, one that involved public exposure, because secrets of this magnitude could not survive daylight, and he arranged a press conference under the pretense of stepping down temporarily from Abbott Enterprises, an act that sent shockwaves through Genoa City and lulled his enemies into a false sense of victory. And as cameras rolled and microphones were placed before him, Jack spoke not as a broken man but as a calculated one, announcing that his family's history was riddled with buried truths, that Allie's disappearance had forced him to confront the possibility that the Abbott legacy was built not only on innovation and integrity but also on fear and compromise. And though he did not name names, he made it clear that he was prepared to release documents that would expose decades of illegal trusts, identity manipulation, and human erasure. And the room erupted as reporters demanded clarification, and Jack watched from the podium as Victor's jaw tightened, as Diane paled, as certain board members exchanged panicked glances, because they all knew exactly what he was referring to, and within minutes Noah confirmed what Jack had anticipated. The network was mobilizing, attempting to extract Allie and disappear permanently before Jack could follow through, and Jack left the press conference abruptly, slipping away as chaos consumed the room, his next move already in motion, because he had anticipated their desperation and planted a tracer within the very funds used to relocate Allie. And as Jack followed the digital trail to a remote private medical facility operating under a false nonprofit name, his heart pounded with a mixture of dread and hope, because this was it, the moment where all his deception would either save Allie or destroy them both. And as he approached the facility under cover of night, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here, on the moment he'd grabbed Noah in blind rage, on the terror that had driven him to violence, and he understood now that fear had been the enemy all along, fear of truth, fear of legacy, fear of what would happen if the lies collapsed. And Jack vowed that no matter what awaited him inside those walls, he would not flinch, because Allie deserved more than survival. She deserved her name, her family, and her future returned intact. And as Jack stepped into the darkness, one certainty guided him forward like a compass. The truth was no longer buried, it was breathing, and it was about to be unleashed.